We're going to go over construction of coil pots. A couple of things before we get started. I extruded coils already because I want to have multiple coils on hand when I start to place them onto my base. I also rolled out and cut my base using the slab roller in a circle template. I have my banding wheel here so that it's easy to move my coil pot around, and then just a small canvas board so that my pot doesn't stick to anything. And then lastly, I have my template. So I drew out my template on a piece of cardstock. I made a grid so that I would make sure that my curve on my template was even all the way through, and then I cut that out. This is the positive. This is what the profile of my coil pot should look like when I'm done, and that's about the height that I want when it's done as well. This is the negative. So I'm going to actually use this, and I'm going to put it against my coil pot as I'm building it and bring it around to make sure that I'm building it to this shape. So we always want to make sure we're using this and we're checking not just one side, but that we're turning it and checking it to make sure that we're following this profile so that in the end our coil pot looks like this. Okay. So to get started, like I said, I rolled out and cut out my slab base, and I put it on a small board, put my board on my banding wheel, and have that set up on my table. So using the coils that I have, the first coil I'm going to use, I'm going to place directly on top of my base. And I want to place it all the way around, make sure it's even, and then where it starts to overlap, I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut it at an angle. The reason I cut it at an angle is if I cut it straight and try to bring them together, they don't fit real well. If I cut it at an angle, they're going to fit together a little bit better. Okay. So once I have that there, my little excess I can set off to the side. According to my template, it goes out at an angle pretty early. So I set it right on top. Now I kind of want to press it down and out a little bit, making sure I don't break that seam that I created, so that I'm able to start keeping my profile. As I'm doing this, I'm able to stretch the clay a little bit by pinching it, and I'm able to start to build that profile. Okay. My next coil that I'm going to do, I'm going to put on top of this one. If I set it directly on top, let me take a piece of the coil. If I set it directly on top, my coil pot's going to come straight up. If I set it just to the inside, my coil pot's going to go in. If I set it just to the outside, my coil pot's going to go out. So based on the profile that I've created, my next coil I'm going to set slightly to the outside so that it can go out till about here. Then I'd set them on top, and then I'd start setting them slightly in as I build up. So my next coil I'm going to set slightly to the outside. My end of my coil I'm going to make sure is in a different spot than the end of my previous one, because I don't want that cut seam in the same place. So I'm going to set it slightly to the outside of my previous coil. And when you use the banding wheel, it spins pretty easily, so you're able to line it up pretty well. So my coil just barely touches, which means I've got some loose space in there, so I'm just going to take a little bit of excess clay from the previous one. I'm going to kind of fill in that gap with it. Because in the end, this should all look like, either the inside or the outside, it should all look like it's one piece of clay. So I'm going to do that and make sure it's just outside of center. I'm going to check it with my profile that I'm building. And it looks like it needs to come out just a little bit more, as does my bottom one. So I can go in and I can stretch and adjust my clay based on that. to make sure I do this all the way around so that it's even. Okay, so now that I've adjusted that outside shape a little bit more, what I want to do is I want to make sure this is all joined together real well. So I'm going to place a coil around the bottom on the inside. It's going to serve the same purpose as the one on our tiki head did, where it joins our base to our sides so that it kind of looks like it's one piece of clay. So I'm going to take an extra coil and I'm just going to lay it down on the inside on the base of next to the coil that we put down first. When I get the coil on there, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to press it in to that corner all the way around. And then I'm going to blend it down into my base. And up into my sides. And this will create a nice seal in that corner so that if you want to make your coil pot watertight, it'll be watertight. It will also really bond the bottom coils together so that you have a much stronger base to your coil pot than, say, if you were to just lay your coils out. So at the bottom it's going to look like one piece of clay all the way around once you get it blended in well. Then I can start continuing to build coils on the outside. Again, I'm going to use my template to make sure that my coils are really kind of following this pattern all the way around. Making sure I turn my pots and measure from multiple spots. Okay, so my next coil, as I continue this outward movement again, I don't want my seam to be in the same spot. I'm going to lay my coil to the outer edge of the coil that's already there. When you're doing this, be careful not to put your coil too far on the outside, because then if your pot spreads out too fast, there's not enough clay there to support it. So you really want more of a gradual movement from in to out and back the other way, depending on your design. Again, I'm going to cut at an angle to join my two ends of my coil a little bit cleaner. I have a little excess clay there, but I'm just going to blend that in to fill in that gap that exists there. Okay, again, I'll check all the way around to make sure it's starting to fit. I've got a couple spots where it's just probably a little too far, so I'm going to roll it back in a little bit. Okay. The last thing I need to do is, when I'm building this, is I'm going to get a couple rows of coils in, then I'm going to start to smooth the outside. What this allows us to do, one is it blends our coils together, and two, when we go to do surface decoration later, we don't have a rough surface to work that on. You don't have to blend the coils on the inside. You can if you want to. Blending them on the outside like this will create a sealed edge, and glaze would fill in any cracks between the inside and that sealed edge in the end anyway. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull about half of my coil down into the coil below it. And I'm going to do that for all three coils that I have on so far. So I did the base one first, and I'm doing the second one. I'm going to do this all the way around And then what I can do is I want to come up and blend all three of them together. If you're off at the bottom, it's going to be a lot harder to adjust anything when you get higher up. Okay. Then I'm going to add a few more layers of coils. Really blend some of that in.